I never thought much about the woods behind my cousin's cabin. They were just there, a backdrop. We'd sit on the porch in the evenings, drinking cheap beer, talking about nothing important while the sun slipped behind the pines. That summer, I'd gone up there to get away. My breakup had gutted me, and my job had turned into this grinding, thankless mess. My cousin offered the cabin for a few weeks. It was supposed to be peaceful and quiet. The first few days felt almost healing. No traffic, no constant buzzing phone, just wind in the trees, the smell of pine, and that weird stillness you only get in the middle of nowhere. There was one thing, though. At night sometimes, I'd hear what sounded like faint talking. Not close, not even loud, just a low murmur drifting through the trees. My cousin brushed it off. "Sound carries weird out here," he'd said, and I believed him. First, the days out there had this strange rhythm. I'd wake up to the smell of pine drifting in through the open windows, the sunlight catching the dust in the air like gold flecks. My mornings were slow, coffee on the porch, the sound of distant woodpeckers echoing through the trees. Sometimes my cousin would drop by after work, boots muddy, smelling faintly of gasoline from his old truck. We'd sit outside until it got too dark to see our beer bottles. He'd tell stories about hunting trips and fishing spots he swore I had to see before I left. It almost felt perfect, like I'd stepped into some old photograph where nothing bad could ever happen. And yet, there were these little moments, like the time I was chopping vegetables and thought I saw movement through the kitchen window. Not in the clearing, but deep between the trees. Just a flash, gone before I could even focus on it. Or the way the nights sometimes felt too quiet. The kind of quiet where you realize you're holding your breath without knowing why. Once, I asked my cousin if he ever got spooked living out here alone. He chuckled, shook his head, and said, "If you start seeing shapes out there, just pour another drink." It was a joke, but something in his eyes didn't match the smile. And then there was the whispering, still faint, still far away. It came maybe once every couple of nights, drifting in just as I was about to fall asleep. Always too muffled to understand, but steady, like whoever it was didn't care if I heard them or not. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that I was letting my breakup, the stress from work, and the isolation get to me. Because out here, with the warm sunlight and the steady sway of the pines, I was safe. At least, that's what I thought. It was late one night when the change came. The air felt heavy, humid, the kind of heat that presses against your skin and makes every sound stick in the air longer than it should. I'd been sitting on the porch, fighting sleep, when I heard it again. The murmuring. Only this time, it was closer, clearer. I froze, trying to pick out the words, but they didn't sound like any language I knew. They had this strange rhythm, almost like chanting, low and steady. My skin prickled. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and turned off the lights, thinking maybe I could spot whoever it was from the window without being seen. The moonlight was bright enough to silver the clearing, and that's when I saw him. A man standing just inside the tree line, not moving, just staring at the cabin, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. And then slowly, he raised his hand and pointed, directly at me. My heart kicked, so hard it felt like my ribs would crack. I ducked below the window, fumbling for my phone. No signal, not even a single bar. The murmuring grew louder. It wasn't coming from just him. It was all around now, threading through the trees, voices overlapping in a way that made it impossible to tell where one ended and another began. I bolted to my cousin's room, ready to shake him awake, but the bed was empty. Sheets pulled back, truck keys gone from the dresser. For a moment, I just stood there, my mind scrambling for an explanation. Maybe he'd gone into town. But why in the middle of the night? That's when I noticed the back door was unlocked. Wide open, in fact. The air coming in smelled wrong, damp, metallic, like wet soil mixed with rust. My stomach turned, and then I saw them. Small stacks of stones, 3 of them, arranged in a perfect line leading from the edge of the clearing right up to the back steps. I backed away, every part of me screaming to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. Somewhere in that dark wall of trees, the murmuring shifted, like whoever was speaking had just started walking toward me. I don't remember making the decision to move. My body just took over. One moment I was frozen by the back door. The next I was grabbing my keys and shoving my shoes on without bothering to tie them. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye through the window over the sink. The man was closer now, no more than 30 feet from the cabin, standing between two of the stone stacks. His head was still tilted, but now his lips were moving faster, the whispering spilling out like a prayer I wasn't meant to hear. I yanked the front door open, only to stop dead. There was a second man out there. Same pale skin, same fixed stare. He was at the end of the driveway, hands in his pockets, like he'd been waiting. The air felt wrong, thick and humming, like the whole forest was holding a low note I could only feel in my bones. My heart was in my throat, but the strangest part was this stillness inside me. Like some part of me already knew there was no safe way out of this. I ran anyway. The second man didn't move as I passed him, but I swear I could hear his breathing, deep, steady, like he was trying to keep time with my footsteps. Halfway to the truck, I glanced back at the cabin. The first man was gone. The back door was swinging gently, like someone had just walked in. I drove without looking in the rear view, my hand slick on the wheel, my chest tight. I didn't see a single headlight for miles, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone on that road. And even now, years later, I can't tell you what scared me more, the men in the woods, or the fact that my cousin never came back that night. I never went back to that cabin. My cousin swore later that he'd just stepped out for a bit the night it happened, but he couldn't explain why his truck was gone or why the back door had been left open. We don't talk much now. Maybe because I don't want to hear his version of the story, or maybe because I'm afraid it would sound too convincing. The thing that stays with me isn't the fear, exactly. It's the quiet certainty that those men weren't random. They knew the cabin. They knew me. And if they'd wanted to hurt me, they could have. That thought keeps me up at night, not knowing why they didn't. I've learned something since then. You can feel safe without ever being safe. And sometimes, the people who seem to know the forest best know it for reasons you'd rather not understand. Back then, the woods felt like the one place I could finally breathe. Now, they feel like they're still breathing with me, just waiting for the right moment to exhale. 2 years ago, I took a seasonal job with a trail maintenance crew in northern Montana. It sounded perfect, good pay, fresh air, and miles of untouched forest. We'd work in teams during the day and sleep in small, single-room cabins scattered along the routes we maintained. My partner for the season was a guy named Wes, mid-30s, quiet, easygoing, the kind of person who could spend 8 hours clearing brush without saying more than a few words. But somehow it didn't feel awkward. From day one, Wes made the place seem safe. He knew the trails like the back of his hand. He pointed out edible plants, warned me about loose rock faces, and always made sure I had enough water. I trusted him without thinking twice. The first week was uneventful, except for one small thing I didn't give much thought to at the time. Every night, before we locked up the cabin, Wes would step outside for exactly 5 minutes. He'd stand in the dark with no flashlight, not moving, just staring into the trees. When I asked what he was looking at, he just smiled faintly and said, "Making sure it's still quiet." The days settled into a pattern. We'd wake up with the sunrise, our breath visible in the cold morning air, and start hiking out to whichever section of trail needed clearing. By mid-afternoon, we'd head back with our packs full of tools, sore but satisfied. Wes wasn't much of a talker, but when he did speak, it was always something useful. How to spot signs of a cougar before it spotted you. How to tell if clouds meant rain or just shade. I respected him for that. The forest out there was beautiful in a way that didn't feel real. Pines so tall you'd get a crick in your neck looking up at them. Sunlight breaking through in thin, golden beams. Sometimes you'd hear nothing but the wind, and it felt like the whole world had paused just for you. But there were moments, small, almost invisible cracks in the peace. Once, I caught Wes watching me while we worked. Not in a casual, "You okay?" kind of way, but studying me, like he was trying to figure something out. He looked away quickly when I noticed. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of boots on the porch. I thought maybe Wes had gone outside again, but when I peered through the curtain, I didn't see him. I didn't see anyone. I started to notice other things, too. Our tools, always cleaned and put away before dark, would sometimes be rearranged in the morning. My water bottle, which I always left on the table, would be on the floor when I woke up. When I asked Wes about it, he'd shrug and say I probably moved them myself without remembering. And maybe he was right. The long days, the cold nights, the isolation, it messes with you. Still, every time he stepped outside at night, standing completely still in the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't making sure it's still quiet. He was listening to something. It happened on our third week out there. We just finished clearing a section of trail that had been blocked by a fallen tree, and we were both exhausted. That night, after dinner, Wes stepped outside like he always did. I was half asleep in my bunk when I realized he'd been gone longer than usual. I got up, pulled on my jacket, and opened the door. He was standing at the edge of the tree line, his back to me. The moonlight made his breath visible, slow and steady. But he wasn't just staring this time. He was whispering, low, deliberate, like he was answering someone. I stepped closer, the wood of the porch creaking under my boots. He stopped talking, but didn't turn around. "Wes?" I asked. He didn't move. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the branches. Then, in a voice so calm it made my stomach turn, he said, "Go back inside." Something in his tone told me not to argue. I shut the door, locked it, and sat on my bunk, staring at the shadows on the floor until he came back in. He didn't explain where he'd been or who he'd been talking to. The next morning, I woke up to find fresh boot prints in the dirt outside. Not just Wes's, there were others, coming from the forest and stopping right at our porch. They weren't there the night before. I pointed them out to him, expecting him to be alarmed, but he just looked at them and said, "They're not for you." That was when I realized he knew who they belonged to, knew why they came so close. And for some reason, he wasn't telling me. The rest of that day, Wes barely spoke. His eyes kept flicking toward the trees, like he was waiting for something. That night, he didn't go outside at all. Instead, he sat at the table, sharpening his axe in total silence, while I pretended to read. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been waiting out there had finally stepped closer. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of the latch on the cabin door clicking. At first, I thought I dreamed it. The kind of half noise your mind invents in that blurry space between sleep and waking. But then I heard boots on the wooden porch. Slow, measured, not hurrying, not trying to be quiet. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. Then Wes's voice, low and tense, from somewhere outside. I couldn't make out the words, but he wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to them. I crept to the window, keeping to the side, so I couldn't be seen. The moon lit just enough of the clearing for me to see Wes standing a few feet from the door, and a figure standing across from him. Tall still, wearing something that blended almost perfectly with the dark pines. Neither of them moved for what felt like forever. Then the figure tilted its head, and I swear I saw a faint smile in the moonlight before it stepped back into the trees. Wes came inside a minute later. He didn't look at me, didn't explain, just locked the door and sat down like nothing had happened. I wanted to demand answers, but I couldn't get the words out, because at that moment, I understood something I didn't want to understand. Whatever was out there, Wes wasn't trying to keep it away. He was keeping me here. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of the latch on the cabin door clicking. At first, I thought I dreamed it. The kind of half noise your mind invents in that blurry space between sleep and waking. But then I heard boots on the wooden porch. Slow, measured, not hurrying, not trying to be quiet. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. Then Wes's voice, low and tense, from somewhere outside. I couldn't make out the words, but he wasn't speaking to me. He was speaking to them. I crept to the window, keeping to the side, so I couldn't be seen. The moon lit just enough of the clearing for me to see Wes standing a few feet from the door, and a figure standing across from him. Tall still, wearing something that blended almost perfectly with the dark pines. Neither of them moved for what felt like forever. Then the figure tilted its head, and I swear I saw a faint smile in the moonlight before it stepped back into the trees. Wes came inside a minute later. He didn't look at me, didn't explain, just locked the door and sat down like nothing had happened. I wanted to demand answers, but I couldn't get the words out, because at that moment, I understood something I didn't want to understand. Whatever was out there, Wes wasn't trying to keep it away. He was keeping me here. Last fall, I rented a small cabin through an online listing. It was advertised as a writer's retreat, tucked deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The pictures showed big windows, a stone fireplace, and a desk facing the forest. It was exactly what I thought I needed to finish my novel. The owner, a woman named Diane, met me in town to hand over the keys. She was warm, friendly, the kind of person who remembers your name after hearing it once. She told me there was no cell service that far up, but the landline worked if you know who you're calling. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. The first 2 nights were peaceful. Cool air, the smell of wood smoke, and the kind of silence that makes you sleep deeper than you have in years. But on the 3rd night, I noticed something odd. In the morning, the curtains in the living room were drawn open, and I never opened them. I figured maybe I'd just forgotten, but it happened again the next morning. That's when I started to wonder if someone had been inside while I was sleeping. The days there were almost idyllic. Morning started with coffee on the porch, watching the fog lift off the treetops. I'd spend hours at the desk by the window, tapping away at my keyboard, while squirrels darted across the clearing. Diane had stocked the cabin with fresh bread, eggs, even jars of homemade jam. She'd left a handwritten note saying, "Call if you need anything," followed by just 7 digits, no area code. I didn't think much about it at first. Every afternoon, the light through the trees would shift from warm gold to that deep, cool blue that tells you night is coming fast. I'd light the fireplace, make dinner, and read until I got sleepy. But there were little things. Some mornings, I'd wake to find my chair slightly turned from the desk, like someone had been sitting there. One afternoon, I noticed muddy streaks near the base of the back door, the kind you get when someone wipes their boots half-heartedly. I told myself it was probably me being careless. Except, I never wore boots in the cabin. One evening, while washing dishes, I caught movement in the reflection of the kitchen window, just a shape slipping past the porch. I stepped outside, but the forest was empty. When I mentioned it to Diane over the landline, she was silent for a beat too long before saying, "You're fine. Just keep the curtains closed after dark." The way she said it made me feel like she wasn't telling me to protect myself. She was telling me to keep something else from seeing in. It was raining hard the night it happened, the kind of steady, heavy rain that drowns out every other sound. I'd been writing for hours, lost in it, when the power flickered and went out. The cabin went dark except for the dim orange glow from the fireplace. I grabbed my flashlight and checked the breaker. Nothing wrong. Just another mountain blackout. I was about to settle back, and when I heard it, the soft creak of the porch boards. One slow step, then another. I froze, a flashlight beam shaking in my hand. "Diane," I called, though I knew it wasn't her. No answer. I crept toward the front window, careful not to step into the beam of light from the fireplace. In the glow, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. They weren't moving, just standing there, heads slightly tilted, as if they were studying the cabin. For a moment, the rain seemed quieter. That's when I noticed the curtains, the ones I'd drawn tight earlier, were slightly open, like someone had pulled them back just enough to peek in. I backed away, my heart slamming in my chest. The landline was on the desk. I grabbed it, dialing Diane's number from memory. She picked up on the first ring. "You didn't close them, did you?" she said. Her voice was low, urgent. "I did," I whispered. "Someone's outside." There was a pause, then. "Listen to me carefully. Do not let them see you move. If they think you're asleep, they won't come in." My throat went dry. "Who won't come in?" But Diane didn't answer that. She just said, "Stay away from the windows, and don't answer the door, no matter what you hear." I hung up and killed the flashlight, sitting in the dark with only the sound of rain and my own breathing. Outside, the boards creaked again, this time closer to the door. I sat there in the dark, every muscle in my body locked tight, listening to the slow, deliberate footsteps cross the porch. Whoever it was stopped right outside the door. A long silence followed. Then came the knock, not loud, not urgent, just 3 slow raps that seemed to echo in my chest. I held my breath. A voice followed. Calm. Almost friendly. It's cold out here. Can I come in? It wasn't Diane. The rain pounded harder against the roof. My pulse thudded, so loud I was sure they could hear it. I stayed still, praying they'd leave. Then the doorknob turned. I lunged for the fireplace poker, gripping it so hard my hands ached. The door didn't open all the way, just a crack. But in that sliver of space I saw an eye. Not wide, not panicked, just watching. They didn't push further. Instead, they let the door drift shut and stepped back. I could hear their boots on the steps, fading toward the trees. But when I dared to peek through the curtain, they weren't walking away. They were standing at the edge of the clearing again, head tilted, rain dripping from the brim of a dark hat. And they stayed there, for hours. By the time the sun rose, they were gone. No footprints in the wet ground. No sign anyone had stood there all night. I packed my bag without eating breakfast and drove until I hit cell service. When I called Diane, she sounded confused, said no one else lived up there, and she didn't know who it could have been. She didn't even seem alarmed, just told me she'd checked the property. I never heard from her again. I've thought about it 100 times since. Who stands in the rain for hours, just watching? And why didn't they try harder to get inside? Some nights, I dream about that eye in the doorway. Calm, patient, like they weren't looking for me specifically, but for anyone who opened the wrong door at the wrong time. That cabin is still listed online. Same photos, same description. And every time I see it, I wonder if someone else has met them.